All right, everyone. Good afternoon. Sherry, do you need me?
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to start. Thank you so much for being here at 4:30 on time on a Friday afternoon. It's very, very nice of you to join us for this super important and special conversation with our friend and one of our heroes from the Israeli Religious Action Center. Welcome, Orly, back to Central Synagogue. And we have people joining us. My understanding is online as well as in person. Is that correct? So let's give the old Laura wave to everyone who's joining us online. Thank you for making the time to get an update on our beloved Israel and all the demands that are happening for our brothers and sisters there. We want to maximize our time here because Orly is speaking at our sister congregation, Emmanuel, at 5:30. So we're going to have about a 5:45. Sorry, she's going to leave around 5:15, 5:20. Sorry. And so we're going to have about a 15 to 20 minute update from Orly. Take notes of questions you might have because afterwards we're going to take your questions and have a chance to get a detailed update. So welcome. Let's have a round of applause, please, for Orly. Welcome her. And thanks for being here.
Thank you, everyone, and thanks, Rabbi Mo. I'm going to pass around, first of all, before I forget, a sign-up sheet for our newsletter. I send up a weekly newsletter, so please, if you're not signed up, sign up. It's a good way for you to keep updated about what's going on in Israel in general and what we at the Israel Religious Action Center are doing about this. So hi, it's great to be here again in this lovely congregation and to see all of you here. I came to the States just a couple of days ago to talk to people about what's going on. And you know, some things are happening in Israel, not a lot, but some. I've been working at the Israel Religious Action Center for over 20 years. And we've had a lot of challenges over the years, but really the last 2 years, and especially the late 18 months since October 7th, have been really the most challenging we have ever faced. We at the Israel Religious Action Center have been working to promote a Jewish and democratic state, a society which is egalitarian, just and pluralistic. And we have fought to create religious pluralism in Israel, to make sure people have the right to express their Judaism as they want, to show people there is more than one way to be Jewish in the Jewish state, to demand equal rights to the Reform movement and to the conservative movement. We worked for women's rights, fought gender segregation in the public sphere, on buses, such as attempts to move women. Yeah.
This mic is a little bit.
Okay, is better? We'll try it, okay. So we fight attempts to send women to the back of the bus or to demand modest clothing while boarding a bus. We've done it for many years and we still do because this is a phenomenon that still happens in Israel, although it's illegal. We are fighting racism, especially racism which is based on Jewish resources. So when rabbis, some of them employed by the state, use their position to incite hatred against Palestinian citizens of Israel and against other groups such as the LGBTQ community, we go against those people because this is a criminal offense and we demand that they be brought to justice. We operate a racism crisis center, which offers legal assistance and representation for victims of racism. And we also operate a legal aid center for Orly, for new immigrants, helping hundreds of people each year acquire civil status in Israel. We've been doing this for many years, and we have relied mainly on the legal tool because under our system, the courts, and especially the Supreme Court, is really the only mechanism that can restrict the power of the government and can help us challenge cases of discrimination. When this current government, Israeli government, came into power 2 years ago, the first thing they set out to do was to restrict the power of the courts. They wanted a system where they have unrestricted power of the government to do whatever they want. And so they initiated the legal coup. They call it reform, but we call it a coup. and try to pass a series of laws. As you know, the Israeli public quite quickly went out to the streets, hundreds of thousands of Israelis who understood the gravity of the situation for our democracy. And we, the Reform Movement in Israel, joined them for the first day under the slogan, "We protect Israeli democracy in the name of Judaism." Because what we said to the Israeli public is that what the government is doing is not only undemocratic, it's also not Jewish. This is not our Judaism. We believe in a Judaism that does not believe in concentration of power in one hand, does not believes in lending a hand to those in need, and in equal rights to all of us, because all of us were created in the image of God. So we have joined people in this pro-democracy protest of the first 9 months of 2023. And this was it was very challenging back then, but it was also exhilarating because we saw an awakening of the Israeli liberal public. And we saw people standing up physically in the streets for the values that we have been preaching for many, many, many years. It was clear that Israelis took responsibility for their democracy and also for their Judaism. People said, we are not accepting the extreme version that the government is presenting of democracy, of Judaism, but rather we believe in a different kind, other values, in values of pluralism and equality. All of this, of course, came to a stop on October 7th, which took all of us, of course, by shock and horror and surprise. And we thought that October 7th would also cause the government to recalculate its route and to have its priorities right for once. But unfortunately, it didn't. From the very first days after October 7th, our first priority, our top priority, was to call for the release of the hostages. We have been holding Havdalah ceremonies every Shabbat in Tel Aviv, at Hostage Square, and in Jerusalem, calling for the release of all hostages as the top priority, which is backed really by a huge majority of Israelis. We heard from the people who were released in recent months the terrible conditions in which the hostages are being treated. And so it's clear that up until now we continue to have those Havdalah ceremonies and take part in protests because we believe that there is no greater commandment than the release of the hostages, and that anybody who does not do it is really responsible for what is going to happen to them. So we've been very busy with calling for the release of the hostages. And unfortunately, we saw that the government quickly resumed its legal coup, did not put that away, did not learn any lesson about the polarization of Israeli society, about the fact that if you want to change, bring about major constitutional changes in our society, this has to be done through a broad consensus and not through a speedy process that alienates many people. And as you know, this week has been critical because one of the most important laws for the government has been passed, which is the laws that changes the composition of the committee nominating judges in Israel. Up until this law, we have a committee that is balanced between political representatives and professional representatives, the judges and the representatives of the Bar Association. This has been changed, and now politicians have a majority in the committee. Now you might say, well, that's what you have here, right? You have a political process of nominating judges. I don't know if the system really works here. It's kind of broken. I don't know if it's a model, but what's important to note is that our system is unique in the sense that we do not have other checks and balances. So this is really the only body that can protect our rights, and especially minority rights, are the courts. And once the politicians get control of the court, all of us are going to be in deep trouble, because if a judge decides according to the people who nominated him, we are not going to get justice in our courts. Thank God this law is not coming into effect immediately, but rather in the next Knesset. So that's going to be after the next elections in November of 26. Hopefully we will be able to reverse the law and have a better government, and that's the only good news about this piece. In addition, the government continues with many other attempts to erode our democracy. First, firing the head of the security service a week ago, and then starting a process to fire the attorney general. Now, the funny thing, I don't know if it's funny or sad, is that the government says, well, the attorney general does not cooperate with the government. She doesn't do what we tell her to do, and this is because they violate the law. And the attorney general has to make sure that the government acts according to the law. So the problem is not with the Attorney General, it's with the government. Nevertheless, they started a process to fire her. And that's, of course, again, very, very dangerous to our democracy, because if you take away all the gatekeepers, we're in big trouble. We saw in the last few weeks that the protests that have gone on all the time, focusing mainly on the hostages, have grown and increased in number. And we saw many, many Israelis go back, again, fighting for democracy and saying, we are not willing to give up on our democracy. And we were with them in the streets. We will also spend a lot of hours in the Knesset, in Knesset committee hearings, talking about the need to protect our democracy and to block dangerous initiatives. And we continue our work in the court to promote the rights of Reform Jews, of women, of LGBTQ people, of Palestinian citizens of Israel, and other groups. As you know, the war has been resumed a few weeks ago by the Israeli government that broke the ceasefire. It's important to note that according to all polls, the government in Israel does not enjoy public support. So a huge majority of Israelis are opposed to the government, oppose the resuming of the war, and demand a ceasefire and the returning of the hostages as the #1 priority. I just saw a poll that was published today on Israeli TV, according to which 70%, 70, of Israelis say they don't trust the prime minister. And by the way, 54% of those who voted for the coalition are against the resuming of the war. So it's a majority within the people who voted for the Likud and for other parties, and that's quite unbelievable. It's clear that we have the government, but we have the people on the other side. A couple of months ago, I saw a sign in one of the protests that I attend weekly that said, "We are not our government." I know some of you may identify with that, and I think it's really clear to understand that although we have a very problematic government, we have a majority of Israelis who do not agree with it, who do not align with the government values, and we just need elections for us to be able to choose another government and stop really this erosion of our democracy. Now, unfortunately, we don't have elections until the end of 26, but we do have other elections going on right now, which I'm sure you know, which is, where's Angela? The World Zionist Organization election, World Zionist Congress. And I want to stress, I know already you know how important it is, but I want to stress how critical it is for what we do and for Reform Judaism in Israel. You know that the Israeli government hardly funds liberal Judaism in Israel. So almost all of the funds are going to Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox institutions, especially under the government, but this has been going on for many, many years. Reform Judaism really relies on funding from the World Zionist Organization, from the Jewish Agency, from the Jewish National Fund. As you know, there is a Haredi, an ultra-Orthodox faction that is trying to gain control of the Congress, and their explicit goal is to cut funding in order to destroy Reform Judaism in Israel. In their propaganda, they list specific cases that we, IRAC, are litigating, whether it's segregation on buses, the egalitarian section in the Western Wall, our demand to teach core curriculum subject in ultra-Orthodox school, and they're saying all of these are terrible. We must make sure that they cannot go on with those cases. So they explicitly want us not to be able to continue the work we're doing. Now, I know that you care about our values, about making sure Israel remains a democracy and an egalitarian society. And for this, we need you and everybody you know to vote to make sure we have a voice in those institutions, and so that we will be able to continue to do what we're doing. And since often I've been asked, how can people here help me, help us? We have here really a concrete thing that you can do, a very simple thing that you can do. And I think it's especially important because I know at this very chaotic reality that all of us are experiencing in recent months, sometimes we are overwhelmed by a sense of despair or helplessness. And here we have something that is very concrete and easy to do that can really make a change. So I urge you to do that and to really talk to everybody you know to vote reform. We have, of course, Rabbi Angela, and we have many, many, many good people on the slates that could help us raise a liberal Jewish voice for a Jewish and democratic Israel. So I think now maybe I'll stop and open it up for questions.
Appreciate the chance to get an overview from you on some of the things that have been happening. Can you just clarify for me and for us, how does the courts work? If you're saying that there's a lot of pressure on the courts from the government, but it sounds like the way the courts have been is still the way it is currently, that the courts are deciding upon the cases that are being brought, and that there's still some authority of the courts as it stands now. Is that correct?
Yeah. So in general, our Supreme Court does not sit in a full panel of the court. So it really, every case, it depends on which panel you're getting. So you could get a more liberal panel, you could get a more conservative panel. And up until now, the court has been occupied by professional judges, whether they're liberal or conservative. Now they want to change it. But for now, we have a professional court that we usually win in our cases, but not always. Sometimes we lose, but at least we
When you say we, meaning that
IRAC.
the Israeli Religious
Religious
Action
Action
Center
Center.
goes to court on
Yes.
behalf of different populations in Israel?
Exactly. We are taking cases to the court, sometimes on our own initiative, and sometimes when we represent specific people who have been hurt. I gave you a few examples, the core subjects, the issue of women's rights on buses. We have cases of, for instance, bomb shelters to the Bedouin residents of the unrecognized villages in the south. And we have a variety of other petitions. And we take the cases to the court, and at least we feel we had our day in court. So people heard us, considered our arguments, and decided, this way or the other. So nowadays, while of course the court system is not ideal, any system could improve, it seems that it is a professional system that works sort of okay. And unfortunately, the government wants to change this because they want to make sure that they always get the upper hand. Now, the problem is that they do a lot of illegal things, right? All the things that we are taking to court are usually cases of discrimination against different groups. And according to our legal system, discrimination is illegal because the state has to treat all the citizens equally. Now the government wants to make sure they can discriminate and still have it their own way. For instance, the issue of enlistment or non-enlistment of the ultra-Orthodox to the army, right? So this is clear discrimination between people according to the religious affiliation or opinions. And the Supreme Court has ruled time and again that this is illegal. Now they want to make sure that they continue to do it. So why not take the court out of the equation, take the Attorney General out of the equation, and do whatever we want because we need it for our own political survival. This is a problem because we don't want to live in a country which is not democratic, which allows people to discriminate, and this is really the crux of the matter.
Thank you. I want to take a few questions from us. I want to do like 2 or 3 questions at a time, just to get a sense of what we might be having amongst us, and then I'll let Orly have a chance to answer them. So, we may not have questions. I have a bunch of questions, but we want to give you a chance to ask them as well.
If there are any questions, please just raise your hand.
Orly, welcome back. It's so wonderful to have you here. Thank you. Can you tell us some more ways that we in America can help support the work that IRAC does? I know that the staff there is so small, and yet you accomplish so much. You're the entire alphabet soup of all these organizations we have in the United States, but you just do it with a handful of people. And with that also, I know that IRAC recently formed the Guardians of Justice advocacy organization to encourage American lawyers to come together to learn more about what you do, to raise funds for what you do, and to carry the message. Can you tell us a little bit about that as well?
Sure. Thanks, Peter. So yeah, we have a lot of work on our hands. And I think the first thing that is important for you to do for us is first to be informed. I think it's important for all of you to understand what's actually at stake, what's actually going on. I think there are a lot of things going around, and we hear a lot of news from different sources. It's important for you to understand what is at stake and what we're doing around this, and to raise our voice to as many people as possible, to show people that we have a lot of problems in Israel, but there are a lot of people, IRAC and many others, who are working to change the situation and to try to promote our values to make Israeli society a better society. Of course, anybody of you who is willing to support us, we will be very grateful. Peter, you mentioned the IRAC's law, the Lawyer Society that we have inaugurated last year. We have decided to form an international lawyer society called Pursuers of Justice. And the idea is to create a forum for me to speak with many lawyers from outside of Israel, to brainstorm about our cases, to hear your perspective on the matter, and to think together about cases or other directions that we should go. So if any of you is a lawyer or knows a lawyer who would be want to be part of this, please contact me. We would be really happy to enlarge this society.
Thank you for that question. We'll take one more, and then I have a related question too. Please.
So what are your priorities in terms of the change that you're advocating to make there? And given the polarization of what we see in Israel and of course here in the US, what are you finding to be the biggest hurdles to that?
Yeah, so I think the issue of polarization of societies, both here and in Israel, is a major question. But I have to tell you that I think the biggest problem for Israeli society is not the polarization, but rather the normalization or legitimization of extreme voices, and especially of racist ideology. I think that what we're seeing today is that voices that used to be out of the political legitimate discourse are now mainstream. And I think this is a huge failure that, of course, influences really everything, influences the educational arena, influences our discourse, and influence what is considered legitimate and what is allowed and not allowed. And I think once you sort of open it up the borders and allow for extreme discourse and behavior, it's very problematic for a democratic country. I think for us, it's important to know that if we're liberal, if we're pluralistic, it doesn't mean that all opinions are allowed, because some opinions which are racist are not allowed and should not be tolerated. And I think it's important for the liberal camp everywhere in Israel and around the world to be very clear on what values we are not willing to compromise upon. I think in Israel we see a lack of leadership on the liberal side. Sometimes people are trying to be accommodating of all opinions, thereby losing our basic concepts and the basic opinions we're not willing to compromise upon. And I think we need those clear voices to make people understand what we're fighting for and what we're not willing to give up. Our priorities is, first of all, to continue to raise a liberal Jewish voice on the matters we're dealing with. We have other organizations doing this, but we are really the only Reform Jewish organization who is doing this from a Jewish perspective. And I think it's important to do this on behalf of Judaism, to tell Israelis that the Judaism you are seeing in the government is not the only Judaism, but you can choose otherwise. And I think really raising a liberal Jewish voice against injustice can really create a great impact on Israeli society. We are continuing to monitor problematic bills. We've been very involved in the budget discussions. The government just passed a national budget for 2025, which has a completely twisted priority, transferring a lot of funds mostly to the ultra-Orthodox sector and discriminating those who share, had all the military burden of the war, and other people who suffered from October 7th, the hostage families, the bereaved families, people who were evacuated from the north and south. So this is something we are continuing to monitor, to bring to the attention of the Israeli public. And we're going to make sure that people are treated as they should be. Women, LGBTQ discrimination is high up on our agenda as well. And as I said, racism, which in times of security tension is always on the rise. And we've seen a lot of racist incidents toward Palestinian citizens of Israel, which we are not willing to accept. Even in times of war, we must be a state which makes sure that all its citizens are treated equally.
You seem to be describing this extreme voices that are getting airtime in the mainstream. Are you specifically talking about people who are government officials, or are you talking about other voices? I'm just curious, who are you talking about here?
Yeah, I think it starts with the government, talking mostly about Ben Gvir and Smotrich, which are the really extreme fringes of our government. But they have been giving a lot of time on media, for instance. So they have been invited to different media outlets, and that has also legitimized them. And we see it starts in the government, but does not end there. So we see it from journalists, we see it from all over the country, religious leaders, Orthodox religious leaders, who are saying horrible things that once were not tolerated. So I think it really trickles down to all phases of Israeli society, and I think they should not be allowed. I think you see some of those here. People say horrible things that once people were ashamed to say. In Israel, you see it not only against Palestinian citizens of Israel, but also against the protesters. The pro-democracy protesters are portrayed as traitors, horrible things, and this, of course, could result to violence by the police, right? So the police, which is governed by Ben-Gvir, is treating very harshly anti-government protesters, and because, they treat them as traitors and not worthy of protection and not worthy of having a freedom of speech. And so the fact that people use certain terms then affects the behavior of different authorities toward them. So it has really dangerous effects, and we should not allow this.
I'll just say when I was in Israel before October 7th, and there was a protest in relationship to the proposed judicial reform, in the protests, what was interesting to hear was many people shouting the word busha, which means shame. And so I was interesting to see sort of like the public using it's like in the writings of the rabbis and doing something that is shameful is considered extremely inappropriate. And they were almost like using rabbinic language, these crowds, to critique people who were saying things that were at the time inappropriate. And I think this chant of busha I would just say, as an American looking at an Israel that I love, I admire, individuals who are just saying, racist language is not acceptable. It's shameful. Unfortunately, they have to say busha. So there's this kind of like tension, which I think over a long period of time is not healthy for a society. What's healthy is to have that voices decrease. It sounds like, at least from the government side, that the public won't have a chance to vote on that until you said the end of 2026. Is that what you said?
I want to say about that we keep saying, by the way, busha, shame, but unfortunately the government has no shame. That's part of the problem, that it seems they really don't have shame, right? They refuse to take responsibility for October 7th. And I think the most vivid example is the treatment of the families of the hostages that are being really treated. I don't have the words for it, by members of the coalition, by ministers. And it's just, it sometimes seems to me that it's not only not Jewish, it's inhumane, right? To treat people who are suffering this way. So I think that's part of the problem, that people have no shame. I have to tell you that we're going to these protests, and it's a good question, do they help, right? I mean, because obviously the government has no shame. But I think, first of all, that they do help in the sense that it is a nuisance for the government that drives them crazy. And that's really important to show them that a lot of people are against them. And the other thing is really important is to show our gatekeepers, the Attorney General, the Supreme Court, that they have the support of the people, that they're not alone, that not everybody agrees with the government, and that we back them in the very brave and hard decisions that they have to decide. And the other thing is that when we have to fight this for so long, we have a sense, sometimes we feel lonely. We feel, well, they have the power, what can we do? But when we go about to the protest and we are surrounded by tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people, we see how many we are. We see that we are not lonely and that we have a lot of power in our hands. And I think in this sense, it's super, super important to go out to the streets.
I see some hands up. I just want to say one more comment before I return to Sarah, and then we're going to ask Sarah's help with the microphone. There might be some of us here who's like, what are we talking about? We love Israel. We stand by Israel. Israel is our brother and sister. And it might seem a little odd to hear a conversation that is so hypercritical about the Israeli government. And for many of us, it's taken us some time to adjust to this type of dynamic where we can still love Israel, consider Israel dear and critically core to who we are as Jewish people in America, and still be critical of the majority government. By the way, there's a minority government who are not racist or who are not Well, I'm sorry. There's different government officials. There is not one government, but there is a majority government coalition that has power. That is the ones that you're critiquing. So this is actually quite a sophisticated, demanding time to try to understand Israel, and I don't want to ignore the fact that for some of us, including me, it is emotionally painful to hear you talk about the Israel government in a critical way. That's just not, that's antithetical to how I was raised as a Jewish person. And we're looking,
yeah.
but we're looking for that sophisticated connection with Israel now to still help understand what's going on, but also be a part of creating the Israel we hope will be.
So I want to just
And then
wanna-
comment on that, and then Sarah,
Yeah.
we'll take like 3 or 4 questions at once, and then we'll
I
go.
just want to react to what you say. I completely understand you, but I want to say very simple thing. When you love someone, you're not indifferent to him. And if you see him make a mistake, you tell him because you care about him. And I think because we see so many problems in Israel, I think it is our collective duty to call it out loud and say, no, we're not thinking that's okay. It does not mean we don't love Israel. It does not mean we don't believe that Israel has the right to exist. Of course we love Israel. Of course we are Zionists. But if Israel does something bad, we have to call it out. And by the way, we have to help the people who are trying to change it, because we are really trying to make Israel work according to the Declaration of Independence, right? To our basic values that upon which our state was founded, right? We want to be a light unto nations. This is our ideal. We want to get there. And if something is wrong, let's try to change it. Of course, not give up on Israel, but say what's wrong and try to change it.
Okay, lots of hands now. Sarah, why don't you take a couple over here? let's take 2 or 3 comments at the same time.
So we're going to take about 2, 3 questions, comments at once, and then let Orly respond.
So, I mean, Mo, it's not much different than what's happening in the United States right now. I apologize to Canadians and people in the UK every week. So what I'm wondering, though, is do you feel that there's a momentum with people frustrated about what's going in Gaza, and then the report came out, and do you feel like the protests are getting bigger, things are, because I feel that way, just sort of watching it and listening to my cousins, and my cousin's a reservist, and he actually wrote this stuff that was very critical of the government, which I've never seen him do before. And he normally would not, but it's because of the situation. So is that happening? And also, is there a way we can do something with that? Like, would online protesting to the government do anything?
Okay, hold that, Orly.
Has there been any attempt to get conservative Jews in the United States, along with modern Orthodox Jews, with Reform Jews, to stand together?
Who had the other questions? Just throw your hands up in the air.
My question is on a totally different subject, but does IRAC do anything about what's happening in the West Bank, what the IDF is doing in the West Bank?
Okay, so I'll take
One more, just one more.
We'll do, yeah,
One
good.
more.
We'll do one more, Orly. It's okay.
My question was, is there some way to accelerate elections? Because so many things have changed since this government was elected, and it's dangerous for democracy to survive for a long period of time where 70%, 65-70% oppose it.
So first to your question, is there a momentum of the protest? I think there is. On the one hand, I have to be very candid and to say that it's exhausting, okay, to go out to protest every week for more than 2 years, which is what we've been doing, sometimes 2 and 3 times a week. Last week, it was every day. Unfortunately, I was here, so I wasn't part of it, but it's exhausting and it's very, very, very hard. On the other hand, I think that now there is a feeling that it's a very critical moment, and that's what brought many people out there in the streets. In the first month after October 7th, people were reluctant to go out and protest. They felt it's time of war, it's not the right time. And as time went by, more people went to the streets because we understand now that the government resumed the war just for its political survival. So it's clear it's completely unrelevant considerations, and they don't have the good of the country in front of their eyes. And I think the unbelievable thing is that there is no one righteous person in Sodom. One person out of 68 members of the coalition is not talking about the hostages, is not talking about the fact that we need to start a recovering process, a healing process for Israeli society. Nobody. They just think of their political survival. So I think this, with a really fury about the fact that the ultra-Orthodox are not going to the army, the issue of the budget, they're getting all the money but not contributing anything, this creates sort of a momentum for more protests. It's true that it's hard to continue to do it on a longer level. The issue of whether people on reserve duty are going now back to the army or not, it's a major question. More and more people try to refrain from going to reserve duty, both because they're exhausted mentally and physically, and because they are very angry about the government. It could maybe reach a level where the government would have a problem to continue with the war. We'll have to wait and see. About joining forces, I think it's a good question. I think part of the problem of the liberal camp that we are always divided. For now, we are working separately, but we are cooperating. We are cooperating both in Israel, both in the States, definitely in the Zionist institutions. We have a very, very close cooperation between the reform and conservative movements. Both, movements are doing a really good job. And I think we're going to continue. I don't think there's going to be like a real, reunion, but rather than a very, very close cooperation which in itself I think is important. On the issue of Gaza and the West Bank.
Can I just
Sure.
say that?
Of course.
While we're encouraging everyone to vote reform in the World Zionist Congress, and also ask you to ask everyone you know to vote and vote reform, I've heard from reform colleagues that when the votes are done, there will be a coalition gathering of non-Orthodox. But I just wanted to add that to the conversation. You were going to say about
Yes,
the
and
West
it's
Bank.
important to say that while there are a lot of liberal slates, the reform, and by the way, conservative, are the most professional and experienced factions, and that's why it's important to strengthen us. IRAC specifically does not work on the West Bank and Gaza. We work only on Israel within the Green Line. We have been dealing with the issues of violence in the West Bank in the sense that we called the police, we complained, saying that this cannot go on. Unfortunately, it has just become over the last few months, and we are we work only within the Green Line. And for your question about early elections, a lot has changed, and this many of us tell the government, you say you have the support of the people, go back to elections and maybe you'll be reelected, but then we will know if it's true. Unfortunately, under our system, only votes and no confidence vote in the government, we go to early elections. Now, since they have a pretty strong majority now, we don't see this anywhere near, and that's why we think it's going to be only in November of 26.
Great. A few more questions because we have Orly for a precious 10 more minutes. Any other questions that people have? Yep.
Can you tell us how the role of Reform rabbis in Israel has changed since October 7th?
Anyone else just before we do that? Just because sometimes questions merge. All right, go ahead, Orly. Thanks.
Yeah, so I think after October 7th, we saw, first of all, a lot more people were in need of spiritual assistance. A lot more people came. We have congregations both in the south and in the north that have been badly hurt, especially in the south. And our rabbis were very busy right after October 7th, helping many, many people who lost so many loved ones and who have been evacuated handle the situation. And by the way, the rabbis themselves needed help because they helped so many people. It was very, very intense. I think in general, an interesting thing to note is that we've seen a shift in the public opinion toward Reform Judaism in recent years, and we see more and more people resort to liberal Judaism. There used to be a saying that the synagogue most Israelis don't go to is Orthodox because most Israelis are not and Reform synagogues. They would choose an egalitarian synagogue, they would choose a Reform rabbi for their wedding or for their bar mitzvah. And according to a survey we ran a couple of months ago, we saw that more than 2 million Jewish population said they felt sympathetic and supportive of the reform movement, and more than 400,000 said they want to take part in our activities. So the potential is huge. We know that a majority of Israelis would have weddings outside the chief rabbinate, although they are not recognized as married in Israel, because people feel alienated by the current orthodoxy and the ultra-orthodoxy of the chief rabbinate, and more Israelis are looking for something else, and they can find it in our congregations and in our synagogues, and that's, I think, a very positive development that we see growing over time. Anything else?
Let me bring you the microphone.
So going back to the occupied territories, how was that decision made to not address what's happening in some way? And isn't it morally problematic?
You know, it's a good question, and it's way before my time. I think in general, we are dealing with Israel proper, okay? I think there are specific organizations that deal with what's going on specifically in the West Bank, and that's their main target. In general, the Israeli reform movement, in contrast to the movement here in the States, does not deal with political issues. So the Israeli reform movement does not even have a stand on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and does not deal with those issues. I think to some extent, we did raise a voice against settler violence, and especially after October 7th, talking about the need for, to treat hate, not to allow hatred, and to make sure that we are trying to work for coexistence and tolerance. But it's a good question, and if it was up to me, I might have decided otherwise, but I can't decide on my own. I can tell you that within Israel, one of our top priorities this last year was to present Israelis with a vision of a shared society of Jews and Arabs. The IRAC with the IMPJ, the Israeli Reform Movement, worked very closely with reform congregations across the country to incorporate shared society activities within the programs of the congregation. And we've done it in many, many places in Israel. And this has been a very meaningful process for many of our congregations. The idea is to create a long-lasting relationship between our congregants and Palestinians who live nearby. And during last Hanukkah, we held an event at our Kol HaNeshama congregation in Jerusalem, where a few congregations presented this program and what they went through. And it was very moving because they spoke with their Palestinian counterparts, and they were very candid about how difficult it is after October 7th for Jews and Palestinians to sit together and talk. But nevertheless, they said, this is so important. We are not willing to give up. We are not willing to give in to the extremists who are trying to make, say you're going to live in war forever and be enemies of each other, but rather we are creating our own future, a future of coexistence and living together on this piece of land. So for us within Israel, that's a major priority. And I think this could really create a change in how Israelis view our future ahead.
I'll just remind us that when we look to the early story of the Israelites, after they're freed from Egyptian bondage, one would think they would be united, they'd be ready to go forward, working in partnership with God to create this Jewish project. But there's a ton of kvetching. There's a ton of inappropriate behavior. Moses is pulling his hair out throughout a bunch of the Torah, and I don't think that's an accident. I think to create the societies we want to live in, wherever we live, in this case we're talking about Israel, it takes clear and focused vision and prioritization on bringing about our highest ideals and values. And if we don't, other forces, like some of these stories we hear about the kvetching and the other behavior that we read in the Torah, can take hold. And so I think it's a lovely fantasy that we have a state of Israel and it is a place of homeland for the Jewish people. That's not a fantasy, that's the truth. But it's a fantasy to think that it doesn't take work. It's a fantasy to think that it's all going to be fine. It just doesn't happen without tremendous effort. And if you're looking for some hope in these very challenging times, we're sitting right next to a person who's giving me tremendous hope and inspiration, because Orly, what you do and what your colleagues do every day in Israel to make it the Israel we dream of is extremely inspiring, and we stand by you. And I hope when you go back and you're doing this work that is exhausting and can be extremely emotionally upsetting, that you know that we stand with you and we'll be voting for reform and in our ways supporting you to help us bring about the Israel that we know is possible.
Thank you. And I
even though
want to
right now
tell
it's
you,
very hard.
and I want to tell you that you are giving me hope, because the feeling that we're doing this not only on behalf of Israelis, but of so many liberal Jews outside of Israel who care about this, gives us a lot of strength to continue our work. And I feel the love and empathy of people here, and it's really meaningful for us and for my staff. So thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you.
So it's 5:17. If you have not yet voted, we have an iPad here. We have a way for you to use your own devices. I'm going to ask you to vote right now. And if you have voted, great. We actually also would love to know if you voted. We have a little pad for you to sign in, because we're kind of taking records of this. We have stickers. And if we know you voted, we won't call you a month from now and ask you, have you voted yet? Which would be nice for you and also nice for us. So if you voted, just fill out a little note here letting us know. If you haven't voted, if you don't want to use the electronic system, we have paper ballots for you or any of your grandmothers out there who'd rather do that. One more round of applause, please, for Orly and our team that's enabled us to have her today. And we'll see you upstairs in a few minutes for service of Shabbat Shalom.
If you'd like to vote here using an iPad, just go to the upper level of the pavilion where Marina is by the door, and she'll help you vote on one of our devices.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, with Angela.
Yeah, it's good.
That's a good one.
Good. We can get Sarah.